To a child, family is the most important thing in the universe. A child does not worry about current affairs or unemployment rates. They will notice, however, a missing parent. In a country with exorbitant kidnapping and murder rates, children are the truer victims. Luckily, I have never suffered the loss of a parent. I have, however, lived in a country where crime rates reached record levels. Colombia in the year 2000 was a dangerous place, filled with drug-related violence, economic instability, and a 50-year-long civil war. That year, my family and I fled to the United States from Colombia. In the time I've lived here, it seems that the situation in Colombia has improved. Journalists constantly report successful rescue missions made by the Colombian military in regards to kidnapped people in the Colombian jungle. News programs report a decrease in drug production and a boom in the Colombian economy, even in today's American Great Recession. While the Colombian government successfully combats the antagonists in the war, conflict is rising in Mexico and in Afghanistan. Rival drug gangs across Mexico battle to control territory, and as one group gathers more land, more lives are lost. As the war between the Taliban and the Afghan state goes on every day, a similar situation is present in Afghanistan. The same strategies Colombia used to stamp out lawlessness should be implemented in Mexico and Afghanistan. And they will be successful in helping Mexico combat its drug war and corruption, and in building the Afghan army in order to battle the Taliban. The conflict in Colombia is comprised of several extra-governmental groups, left-wing rebels like the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia and the National Liberation Army, known by their Spanish acronyms, the FARC and the ELN, as well as the paramilitaries like the AUC or the Self-Defense Forces of Colombia. These groups battle state forces, army, and military. And this is what comprises the conflict in Colombia today, starting from the 60s. In 1964, the FARC was formed with the intent to overthrow the government. It's today the world's richest guerrilla because of its dabbling in the drug market and in kidnapping, and it's supported by Venezuela and Ecuador. Weapons today found in rebel camps include arms, Venezuelan-made arms, and the top commander of the FARC was found in Ecuador. Several successes have been made against the FARC by ex-President Álvaro Uribe, backed by U.S. aid. Many leaders have been killed, and today the leader of the FARC is a more peaceful man who wants to turn the FARC into a social movement rather than a war movement. In 2012, an end to kidnapping was announced, and there have been steps towards peace talks, which in fact began in 2013 in Cuba. The AUC is a right-wing paramilitary as opposed to a left-wing guerrilla army like the FARC, and it was formed by drug traffickers and wealthy landowners in the 1990s. It was used by the Colombian government, which was at the time very inefficient to deal with these guerrilla armies, in order to battle groups like the FARC and like the ELN. However, because of civilian disapproval due to many human rights abuses made by the AUC, the Colombian state demobilized the AUC in 2003 as a very important power play made by the Colombian state. There are other groups in the Colombian conflict. These groups are the drug trafficking organizations, also known as drug cartels, in cities Medellin and Cali. These groups were led by three men, Pablo Escobar, Gonzalo Rodriguez Gacha, and Carlos Vélez. To ward off the threat of extradition, these men offered to pay Colombia's entire external debt, to dismantle all their drug labs, and to introduce their external assets, which was more than $3 billion at the time. However, the Colombian government denied these men, in which case they introduced a situation known as plata or plomo, which means lead or silver. You either take our bribes and do what we want you to do, or we will shoot you. This paralyzed the justice system because of many assassination attempts made on judges, journalists, and politicians. Luis Ganem, a presidential candidate, was assassinated by Pablo Escobar's men, and there were many, many bombings in Bogota and other cities. The Colombian DTO, however, fell due to a divide and conquer plan made by the Colombian state and help from American intelligence forces. The state worked with a group known as Los Pepes, or people persecuted by Pablo Escobar, and with the Cali cartel in order to take down the Medellin cartel. The Cali cartel and Los Pepes eliminated foot soldiers, testified in court against Pablo Escobar, and destroyed many of his properties. Escobar was later assassinated with help from American aid, and therefore ended Medellin cartel. Later, President Ernesto Samper struck against the Cali cartel, and therefore ended their regime in Colombia as well. Colombia has been known to be the only success story in the Western Hemisphere today. They have reduced murder rates, kidnapping rates, demobilized the paramilitary, and they today have a very strong central government as opposed to 10 years ago. The army was built by reorganizing the ranks, including more efficient ranks, and by enforcing quality rather than quantity. The army was reorganized when Andrés Pastrana, president at the time of Colombia, replaced the top 3 leaders with US-trained men. These men then emphasized better selection and training in the rest of the forces. Today, there are many specialized groups in the Colombian military, which include air, mountain, counter-narcotics, and home battalions to reduce desertion. These home battalions may be the most important strategy in Colombia today. There are certain groups that, instead of fighting in the central camps for Colombia, will be moved to their own hometowns and protect their homes and look out for intelligence. And these are usually battalions of about 40 men. They've also introduced a better helicopter fleet, therefore increasing mobility. The helicopter fleet in Colombia has increased from 20 to 250. Military trainers have an increase rather than combat forces. This is much more cost efficient and also much more efficient to the army as well. As well as helping the military gain efficiency, much of aid has gone to the impoverished, and especially to education. When we shape the environment in which a child is raised, inevitably, we shape the child. By introducing education to the Colombian system, children learn to solve conflict by resolution rather than violence. One of also the most important strategies in Colombia includes civilian strategies. All people in Colombia, whether they lived in rural or urban areas, whether they were of African or European lineage, had an interest in helping their home. As the society pushed for peace, the government had no choice but to sit down and deal and attempt negotiations with the different groups. Civilian encouragement provided an incentive to government officials as well as to guerrilla and paramilitary groups, because government officials obviously want to get reelected, and the warring groups want support from the masses. The results have been incredible. Compared to 2002, coca production has been cut in half. Kidnappings are down by 88%. Fighters have been disarmed more than 50,000. There has been an 80% reduction in the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia. Land values today have skyrocketed. Highway traffic is up, which means that people are not afraid to travel from one region of the country to another. And homicides are also down. The government today is in control of 90% of the country. Mexican conflict today is similar to Colombia in the 1980s, that is Colombia with all of its drug trafficking organizations. In 1989, the Guadalajara cartel, the main cartel in Mexico at the time, splintered into separate drug cartels when its leader was killed in jail. And these groups filled the holes left behind by the Medellin and the Cali cartels, which at the time had been dissolved by the Colombian state. The violence today stems from the territorial control between all of these warring groups. In 2008 alone, 7,000 people were murdered. Kidnappings, robberies, and the murder of journalists is among the world's highest. There are cities in Mexico in which every single cab driver is a spy for one of the drug cartels. The most powerful drug cartel in Mexico today is the Sinaloa cartel, and it's led by Joaquin Guzman, also known as El Chapo. And this is a man so ingenious and so smart that he runs a company almost as complicated as Amazon or Barnes & Noble, but he does it in secret. In fact, nobody knows how big his federation is. This man produces more than half the drugs entering the United States, which is more than Pablo Escobar ever produced at his peak. This is 40% of the global drug market. Joaquin Guzman's federation, known by that name because there are specialized groups that work almost autonomously, work in 1,000 American cities. This violence has traveled from Mexico to the United States. Kidnappings in Phoenix have tripled over the last couple of years. This is because there's a name given to the United States. It's called the insatiable American nose. And this is what fuels the black market in Mexico and allows the drug cartels to keep producing more and more drugs in order to traffic them into the United States. This is why focus must be on reform, institution building, and poverty in Mexico. The comparisons between Mexico and Colombia are plenty. Organized crime, excessive violence, especially in the case of civilians. Ciudad Juarez, for example, sees up to 10 or 11 deaths a day. There is unequal distribution of wealth, unemployment, and although Colombia's political system is today strong, it was one day just as weak as Mexico's today. Mexican drug trafficking organizations, as mentioned before, in fact grew from Colombian ones. The differences are very important, however. The cartels today are more sophisticated, which means that a divide and conquer plan will not work. Intelligence must instead be tailored to each organization. The current plan that Mexico has, aided by the United States, is to extradite top men, to strengthen their police force in order to eradicate corruption and divulge production by flooding areas with military and enforcement. This plan is inefficient and in fact increases the responses made by the cartels. Drug production has increased in Mexico, not decreased, and violence has not halted whatsoever. Drugs in fact provide an out to many young people in Mexico who cannot ascend the economic ladder any other way. This is why we need to fight poverty and instill education in the Mexican mindset. The plan today is not enough. A better plan would be to make law enforcement more efficient the way Colombia has, by enforcing quality, not quantity. The Taliban gained power during the Civil War and at that time controlled 90% of Afghanistan. After the September 11 attacks, American involvement increased, which severed ties between Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. Today, Saudi Arabia and Pakistan both outwardly condemn the Taliban, but they previously recognized Taliban-led Afghanistan, even when the United Nations did not. Today, Mohammed Omar's advisors live in Quetta, Pakistan, which only emphasizes the link between Pakistan and the Taliban in Afghanistan. Although several incursions have been made, commanders still evade capture. The United States was Colombia's only ally at the time that these strategies were put in place, and provided no more than 800 trainers, none of which were involved in combat. In Afghanistan, there are greater than 40 countries and 140,000 foreign soldiers who help to execute military missions. The Taliban is not unified, which means that a strike against it would be very useful. And the Afghan state does not govern in certain areas or work to decrease poverty and unemployment. The American military surge was therefore able to gain traction in Afghanistan during the early 2000s, but they did not expect the Taliban comeback. This is why the focus should be on the weaknesses in the Afghan army, which include desertions, a lack of competent leadership, and a lack of competency in general. Expansion won't help. Flooding areas with troops will not help. This, in fact, recruits people away from the Taliban, away from the Afghan army rather, and to the Taliban, which is not something that we want. We need to therefore get good governance into stateless areas and introduce the strategy home battalions, which was introduced in Colombia. The current American strategy is to triple the combat forces, weaken the insurgency, and to build the Afghan state. This is very similar to the American strategy in Mexico. A better strategy, however, would be the Colombian standard. We increase military trainers to deal with the lack of competency. We focus less on drug control and more on establishing functioning governances in order to increase the faith in native Afghans in foreign aid. Stronger leadership in Afghanistan will also help deal with the incompetency of military generals. Most importantly, however, is a war on poverty. 44% of Colombian aid went to social and economic aid. rest of the strategies. There is one caveat with all of these strategies. We cannot expect any solution to change anything in either of these countries within days, weeks, months, or even a couple of years. The solutions that were put in place in Colombia took a decade to show results, and they're still showing results today. This is why for any of these solutions to work in any of these countries, we need to have allow time for these solutions to take effect and have patience. Colombia has been able to see the light again. After 50 years, the government has been able to make headway with organizations that once refused to negotiate. With international help, as well as with grassroots movements that began in Colombia, drug production kidnapping have decreased while the economy booms and children flourish and are educated. Mexico, however, seems to be falling into the same pit of despair that Colombia saw more than a decade before, as was Afghanistan. By utilizing the strategies Colombia employed in its own country, the Mexican government and people will begin to see a dramatic difference in their livelihoods, as will Afghanistan. The strategies used in Colombia will be successful in helping Mexico combat its drug war and corruption, and it will be the Afghan army in order to battle the Taliban. It should be noted, however, that good results will not be beneficial only to the countries named. An increase in the stability of Afghanistan and Mexico would influence all the countries surrounding these nations, especially the United States, a government with lots of fingers and lots of power.